Today we will look at one terrifying case that will shock you, so watch this video until the end. The case that happened in 1995 in New York is about sacrifice and openness to the world, which became fatal for 21-year-old Kimberly Antonikos, the heroine of today's story. She is a beautiful girl with a good heart who could not have imagined, even in a terrible dream, what horror life has prepared for her. Thomas Antonikos, a successful businessman and a wonderful father, learned about the disappearance of his daughter from her colleagues. The girl's co-workers contacted him when Kimberly failed to show up for work on the first spring day. She was very punctual and was in good standing with management, so her absence was considered a bad sign, and they were right. The assumption that the employee was ill was dispelled. The worried father also said that he had not been able to call Kim since last night and had a premonition of trouble. His girl was always in touch because he made her a rare and expensive gift for those times, a cell phone. But she didn't answer the phone, so the man was forced to contact her friends. However, they did not help him. No one has seen Kimberly since she left the party in the early morning hours of March 1. The grieving father decided not to wait and went to the police only after learning that the young woman was wanted. Law enforcement officials suggested waiting at least 24 hours. It is quite possible that she spent the night at someone's house and will soon make herself known. She was already an adult and could do what she wanted. This attitude to the case did not satisfy Thomas, so he organized his own investigation. Remarkably, the light on the story of Kimberly's disappearance was shed by a psychic. A person with supernatural abilities was approached by the girl's mother. The woman flew from Florida as soon as she learned about what had happened. In despair, on the advice of a friend, she decided to use all possibilities. The psychic, at the sight of the photo of Kim, reported that she is still alive, but very weak and dehydrated. She also said that the girl was kidnapped by acquaintances and tried to escape more than once. Finally, she added that the deadly danger comes from several people, and the name of one of them begins with the letter J. Apparently, this is the ringleader of the gang. This information was later made public and caused not only a public outcry, but also unavoidable consequences. However, let's start at the beginning. Kimberly was born in 1974 in New York, USA. She was the only child in the family. Despite the fact that the girl grew up in love and affluence, she was not pampered. Her parents came from simple families. Nevertheless, her father, Thomas, managed to achieve considerable heights. He created his own company, which was engaged in computers, earned funds the man was happy to spend on his favorite daughter and her desires. When Kim was a little girl, the couple Antonikos divorced. The child was left to live with his mother. However, this did not weaken the connection between the little girl and her father. He took her on weekends and spent all his free time with her. When Kimberly's mother found a new man and decided to move to Florida, the girl faced a choice: to stay with her mother or with her father. Since she did not want to move and felt as wonderful with her dad as with her mom, the young lady preferred to live in familiar conditions. So, Kim began living with her father, with whom she was very close. She grew up a well-mannered and sociable child. Over the years, she became a bright beauty. Her dazzling smile always lifted her spirit. In general, she was distinguished by a sense of humor and positivity. Since childhood, she was surrounded by care, protected from trouble. Therefore, Kimberly saw only good in all people. Immediate problems bypassed her, in connection with which she only heard about the dark side of life. Unfortunately, an open and kind soul brings a lot of sorrows to its owner. In 1994, the girl became a student at the College of Staten Island. A little later, she informed her father that she felt old enough to live independently. Undoubtedly, Mr. Antonikos was concerned about her decision, but respected it and decided not to oppose it. Then, he promised himself to secure her separate living arrangements as much as possible. Therefore, Thomas purchased a nice apartment for his daughter in an affluent area of the city. He even equipped his daughter's dwelling with an alarm system, not wanting her to park far from home. The man bought a space in the garage across the street, and to keep her in constant communication, she had a cell phone and a pager. Everything that was up to the father, he did to the highest standard. His concern for Kim's safety had good reason. It had to do with his affluence and the girl's little worldly experience. Kimberly not only did well in school, but also worked part-time. She refused her father's offer to continue the family business because she wanted to find her own way. So, Kimberly took a part-time job as an accountant at a successful firm. At this time, she lived an ordinary student life, often entertained, attended parties. Her father repeatedly offered to return, but she refused. Her desire to be independent led to an unexpected drama in early 1995. Kimberly sheltered in her home friend Liz Pace and her family. Their apartment was being renovated. Out of the kindness of her heart, Kimberly offered her spacious lodging. The young people had fun. They cooked together and spent evenings together. On one such day, Kimberly and her friend decided to go to a party. The girls put on makeup, did their hair, and picked out suitable outfits, after which they went to the party. According to Liz, they had a good time. They had fun and danced. Afterwards, Kimberly drove them home in her white 1994 Honda Accord. However, she did not go up to the apartment, citing unfinished business. The girls embraced and never saw each other again. The first place Mr. Antonikos went to after the police was the parking lot next to his daughter's house. However, the car was missing from the garage. On the floor, near the wall, the man noticed a shiny object. It turned out to be a small gold earring. The father remembered that he had given his daughter similar ones, and just in case, he took them with him. Kimberly wasn't in the apartment either. He only came across guests, a friend, her boyfriend Joshua Torres, and their joint 2-year-old child. Thomas was aware of the decision, but was not in favor of it. The tenants were also surprised by the absence of the hostess and worried about her. Joshua reported that he was looking for Kimberly and volunteered to help. Later, Thomas came to the police station again. He stated that his daughter had had an accident, but the officers remained adamant. The unhappy father decided to communicate again with Liz, who was the last person to see Kim. The man showed the found jewelry. The girl confirmed that she had seen those earrings on Kim the night of the disappearance. Next, Mr. Antonikos visited the places where his daughter often went. There, he talked to many people, but did not learn anything important. Joshua, in turn, offered to look not only for Kimberly, but also for the car, which was very conspicuous. Then, Thomas went to the police for the third time. This time, he was determined. Therefore, he informed the law enforcement officers that he would not go anywhere until they went on a search. One of the detectives responded to the appeal of the agitated father. He said that despite the protocol, he would take up the investigation. The first thing he did was to reconstruct the events of February 28. Miss Antonikos went to college in the morning, then to work. Afterward, after working a few hours, she came home. There, together with friends, she had dinner and then attended a party with Liz. Around 4 a.m., the girls arrived home. After that, Kim went to the parking lot. What urgent business she had at such an early time, it was not possible to find out. And the apartment and garage of the missing was searched, but no evidence or traces indicating a struggle were found. No foreign fingerprints were found either. Either someone made an effort to clean them, or the intruder acted with gloves. The car and driver seemed to have vanished without a trace. The only concern was the earring that was found. The girl's bank account was also analyzed. It was found that the last time she used the bank card was the evening before her disappearance. Therefore, the theory of running away from home was ruled out. The detective's theory was that Kimberly had been kidnapped. At this point, other police officers joined the investigation. For lack of other solid leads, law enforcement unofficially adhered to the information that Mrs. Antonikos received from the psychic. By the way, it is not uncommon for authorities to cooperate with people who have psychic abilities. Sometimes such involvement has positive results, but it is simply not publicized massively. Witness interviews followed. The first people interviewed were Liz and Joshua. Officers learned that 65 calls had been made from Kimberly's landline on the morning of March 1. This surprised detectives. However, Joshua explained that he had been calling all of his friends and acquaintances, hoping to figure out where Kim had gone and why she hadn't spent the night at home. According to him, she was like a little sister to him. Thanks to Liz's testimony, it was possible to determine what clothes Kim was wearing. A portrait was drawn up, which was to be published. A distinctive note on the girl's body were tattoos. One of them was in the form of a scorpion, her zodiac sign. The other was located on the waist and represented an infinity sign in the form of two naked people in parallel. There was a search for the missing car. All the scrap metal collection points, as well as other places where the vehicle could be in order to disassemble for parts or sale, were checked. However, there was no positive result. A check of the girl's cell phone was also unsuccessful. Police officers told Thomas that he should have paid attention to the letters and phone calls he was receiving, as his daughter's kidnappers could have contacted him and offered a ransom. However, the Antonikos family remained in limbo until March 4. Around 2 a.m., emergency services received a report of a fire. A large abandoned house was burning at 86 Woodhaven Avenue in Queens. Several fire crews were involved in putting it out. When the fire was finally extinguished, a charred body was found in the basement of the building. Forensic experts found out that the deceased was a woman of 25 years old. On her head survived a part of black long hair. There were also traces of tape. The poor woman's legs were bound, and her hands were tied behind her back. However, the worst part of the story was something else. She was alive at the time of the fire, as evidenced by her smoke-filled lungs. In fact, the young woman was burned alive. Detectives hypothesized that the body found belonged to the missing Kimberly. However, dental records were needed for a full identification. At the same time, the ashes were inspected. The smell of gasoline could also be smelled in the air. It was obvious that the house had been set on fire. Apparently, someone had decided to destroy evidence of a serious crime, and indeed, there were no traces except for the charred body. Examining the charred corpse, the specialists also found tattoos matching the description of the missing woman. The records that came from the dental clinic confirmed the suspicions of the investigation. That's how Kimberly Antonikos' body was found. Later, other circumstances of the case became known. One of the eyewitnesses of the fire reported that he often walked with his dog. However, the pet had been behaving strangely in recent days. It was nervous and barked at the house. It was unclear what could have caused this reaction. After the fire and the discovery of the body, it became clear what so attracted the attention of the dog. The girl tried to free herself and called for help. With its acute hearing, the dog heard the sounds coming from the basement while they were inaccessible to human perception. When the officers questioned the owner, it turned out that he had visited the building more than once in recent days. The fact is that he put the house for sale and monitored its condition, and also picked up the mail and receipts. However, the man did not look into the basement, inspecting the house only from the outside. As the homeowner admitted, he never heard the suspicious noise. Otherwise, he would have paid attention to it. The man was clearly shocked by what happened. The investigators decided to question Joshua again. Something they didn't like about the guy, in addition, by a strange coincidence, his name began with the letter J. This time, Joshua talked about the guy he hadn't reached the day Kimberly disappeared. It was a young man nicknamed Psycho, a Russian national who had once dated Kimberly. Detectives decided to verify the information. They determined that the Russian had moved to the United States with his parents as a young child. Having grown up, he became a member of a gang and repeatedly broke the law. So, in the case appeared the first suspect, who was soon detained. During the interrogation, Psycho became aware of the death of a former lover. However, his reaction shocked the detectives. The young man did not just claim that he was not involved in the crime, he was heartbroken. It was clear that he was experiencing genuine emotions. Investigators also wanted to see how he would behave at a crime scene, so they took him to the scene of the tragedy. There, everyone was convinced that they had the wrong man in custody. In addition, after some time, the guy's alibi was confirmed. Once again, the investigation was deadlocked. The victim's family decided to turn to the psychic once again. This time, the psychic said that she saw 4 people involved in the crime. She also said that the kidnappers wanted to establish contact, but they failed to do so. Allegedly, the kidnapping itself did not initially suggest a sad ending. The denouement is coming soon, the fortune teller summarized a couple of days later, hoping to get some information. The missing woman's father announced a $10,000 reward to anyone who would help catch the culprit. Mr. Antonikos could not forget the words spoken by the clairvoyant. If he had been told earlier that he would rely on some fortune tellers and soothsayers, he would never have believed it, but grief makes a man suggestible. The man went over in his mind her words about her daughter's kidnappers wanting to get in touch. What did that mean, and what prevented them? Then he returned home and sat down at the table. He stared at his phone for a long time as he suddenly remembered a minor point on the day Kimberly disappeared. He had listened to all the answering machine recordings as he had been expecting his girl to contact him. However, there had been no voicemails except perhaps 2 blank ones. When he turned them on, he heard nothing. There was dead silence on the other end of the handset, so he mistook them for some sort of device malfunction or communication problems. However, it later turned out that this was not the case. 5 days after the girl's body was discovered, officers managed to locate her car. It was parked in a fairly quiet area of town, not far from the crime scene. The investigation hoped to find fingerprints in the car. However, the vehicle was well washed. The only evidence was Kimberly's hair and a second earring in the passenger compartment. It seemed like a breakthrough in the investigation, but it did not happen. At the same time, Kimberly's father was being implicated in a local mob hit. Allegedly, such a rich and successful man was clearly connected with the criminal world. Some of the man's entourage even blamed him for the death of his daughter, as if his dark deeds had brought trouble on his daughter. The grief-stricken father denied any involvement. Detectives, through their own channels, managed to verify the information floating around. It was not confirmed. Thomas was clean and conducted his business openly. In July 1995, a young man was arrested by the police in a New York City home for burglary. Unexpectedly, he provided information concerning the case of Miss Antonikos. The detainee claimed that he had heard from an acquaintance that his friends had kidnapped and then burned the girl. When the officers heard the name of the unidentified man, the picture of the crime finally emerged. It was none other than Joshua Torres, the same guy who lived in Kimberly's apartment and helped in the search for her. Detectives decided to take a closer look at him. The young man was called back in for questioning. He denied any involvement in the crime. However, during a long conversation, he gave himself away. Torres said that if he had been the kidnapper, he would have fed Kim. Detectives latched onto that line because there was no coverage of the victim dying of hunger, thirst, or cold. No one outside the investigation knew that, not even her father. However, they needed more evidence, and it didn't take them long. Officers looked into the identity of the new suspect. It was found that the guy had a criminal record and was repeatedly attracted. In addition, he did not work anywhere and lived at the expense of his roommate, Liz. While the girl worked, he took care of the child. Having free time allowed him to plan the crime in peace. He knew Kimberly's routine, could track her down, and hide her in an abandoned house. Then why didn't he demand a ransom? Something must have gone wrong, so the unsub got rid of Kim. The calls Torres made that morning were analyzed. It became obvious that the guy was lying when he said he was calling Kimberly's contacts. Most of the numbers belonged to random people with no connection to Kimberly. After examining his pager data, it was discovered that the guy had sent some strange messages on March 1. The ring around Joshua was gradually closing. He had been suspicious to detectives for a long time. Finally, they got solid leads to apprehend him. They admitted to him that they no longer considered Kimberly's ex-boyfriend a suspect. And once again, they pressed the case intelligently. That's when Torres said he suspected his friends of massacring the girl. He pleaded guilty to accessory to kidnapping. At the same time, he said that he did not think that his comrades would eventually decide to get rid of a common friend. According to him, they just wanted to get the ransom and then let the victim go. But the plan didn't work. The kidnappers wondered why their calls went ignored by Mr. Antonikos. It turns out that they did make contact with Kimberly's father and even recorded a message to ransom her. However, the recording of the conversation was not saved on the answering machine for some reason. The kidnappers were angered by the father's inaction and decided to wait for further developments in the case. It turns out that they were frightened not only by the publicity, but also by the words of the clairvoyant that the suspect's name begins with the letter J. This information was not only published in the media, but also broadcast on TV with reference to an additional unofficial source of information. It's a mystical, vicious circle. One action spawned another. After speaking with the police, Joshua was released on bail and then disappeared. At the same time, his accuser Jose was shot in the back of the head while walking with his wife. His wife later admitted to investigators that her husband did not trust Joshua, used a tape recorder when talking to him, and wanted to expose him. She claimed he felt guilty about kidnapping Kimberly, but he didn't set the house on fire and soon wanted to confess everything to the police, as he had confessed to her. Thanks to the pager messages and the suspect's statements, investigators established the details of the kidnapping and the crime. It was found that 4 men were involved: Joshua Torres, Julio Negron, Jose Negron, Julio's namesake, and Nicholas Brett, nicknamed Jay. Notably, Julio dated Kimberly for a while and even wanted to marry her, but she rejected his proposal. The young people were united by the fact that they were friends and had a criminal past behind them. However, it did not compare to what the guys did to the poor girl. Nicholas had been released on bail shortly before the kidnapping, thanks to his mother. He got off with a small fine for a crime that could have sentenced him to more than a year in prison. As for Joshua, at a young age, he was involved in cases of child abduction, violence against a minor, illegal carrying of weapons. However, he too was limited to a light sentence for the acts committed. The initiator of the crime was undoubtedly him. It was Joshua who coordinated the group's actions. After Kimberly returned from the party, the men grabbed her in the parking lot. Apparently, they'd been following her and waiting for the perfect moment to leave her alone. A gun was used for intimidation. Kim resisted, so her hands were tied and her mouth, eyes, and even ears were covered with duct tape. After that, the bandits put the girl in the trunk and drove her to an abandoned house. There they took the unfortunate woman to the basement and tied her to a chair. They even removed her shoes so that she would not attract attention to herself by tapping her feet. Before this, the young men told Kimberly that her father owed money, and they would release her after he had paid them. Julio was supposed to look after the girl, bring her food and water twice a day, and make sure she was warm. However, he was afraid of the consequences and left the house. As it happened, the victim did not eat or drink for 3 days and also froze from the cold. As soon as the abductee was left alone, the perpetrators informed Joshua. He made an audio recording in which he demanded $775,000 as ransom. Then the guy called the girl's father and left 2 messages which later turned out to be empty, so they were not taken into account by Mr. Antonikos. The kidnappers waited for news and sincerely did not understand why Kim's father did not get in touch with them. During this time, Kimberly, left unattended, passed out from dehydration more than once, but she was still fighting for life. The intruders were angry that they had not received the ransom, and they were afraid of being caught, so they decided to let her go. When they went down to the basement, they found the girl unconscious. Deciding that Kimberly was dead, they thought of nothing better than to get rid of all the evidence and at the same time of the hostage. In talking to Liz, the officers discovered that Joshua had used his roommate as an alibi. He directed the actions of the accomplices while in the house with the child. Liz claimed that at first she did not even realize that her boyfriend had kidnapped Kimberly. Later at trial, Liz testified against him. She said that after the interrogation, Joshua came to her and confessed to everything. After that, he beat her and silenced her, threatened to kill her, and soon went on the run. Sometime later, the perpetrator was arrested. He was also suspected of killing Jose. However, there was no direct evidence of this. Investigators decided to confront the former friends. They informed them that Joshua denied his involvement in the massacre. When Julio learned about it, he cooperated with the investigation and told everything. This allowed Torres to be convicted of Kimberly's murder. As a result, the trio was charged with murder, arson, kidnapping, and holding a person against his will. During the trial, it was found that Joshua had repeatedly tried to mislead the investigation and avoid punishment. The jury deliberated for about 10 hours. In the end, Joshua Torres was sentenced to 58 years in prison. Nicholas Brett received the same sentence. Julio Negron was only found guilty of accessory after the fact. As such, he was sentenced to between 2 and 6 years in prison. Tomas Antonikos was satisfied with the verdict of the court. He did not want the criminals to be sentenced to death. In his opinion, it would have been the lightest punishment. It is known that Nicholas was repeatedly abused and assaulted in prison, and after 2 years, he died of AIDS. Julio was released after 2 years, having served his sentence. Joshua will not be released until 2053, at the earliest if he lives to see it. Sadly, in 2005, the victim's father died of cancer. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel. There are many shocking stories ahead of you.